Meeting of our, oh, see, I should wait for it every time. Welcome to the October 8th meeting of our AI task force. Yes, it is October, so we're excited. We're almost there. As usual, just a quick reminder that the task force members and technical advisors should be showing up as panelists in the Zoom. If you aren't, please get in touch with Scott or Dan who can promote you. This meeting is being recorded. You can access recordings of prior meetings on the AI Task Force website via the Governor's Office of Policy Innovation in the Future. Okay, so we're going to go over today's plan. Today's meeting is a chance for us to reflect on the entirety of our work together as we get closer and closer to the conclusion of our work here at the end of the month. You'll all be working hard. You've all been working hard for the past several months to pull together the robust set of ideas and recommendations that are reflected in the documents in front of you here and that we'll discuss today. And today's conversation is the last big opportunity for us to make sure that we have the right recommendations and weigh in on other major elements of our future report. We'll have a chance to hear about anything that we may have missed, any recommendations that we should take another look at, and to make sure that the ideas included here are responsive to the charges the governor set out for us back in December. In the first half of the meeting today, we'll have Dan from the GoFIF staff run through the changes we made since our last meeting. We also have some time set aside for reactions to the responses we received during the recent public comment section, which were sent to you earlier this morning. And we'll close out the top half of the call with a conversation about some themes that we might consider including in the letter from Dave and myself to open the report. And then we'll take a break. And after our break, the rest of our time together will be spent discussing the complete draft that GoPIF sent around yesterday alongside the prep memo. And we'll get into this more when we get to that section, but this is a fantastic opportunity to hear any big takeaways as we enter into the final stages of the work. The staff have been really hard at work turning around drafts for us to react to. And again, we owe them a huge debt of gratitude. They've really spent an incredible amount of time on this. And I want to thank you for your understanding since we only got this one to you only yesterday. And we'll aim to adjourn the meeting by 4 p.m. So with that, I'm going to ask Dan from the GoPIF team to run through a brief conversation about the public comments, and then we'll go over the edits to the recommendations we discussed in our last meeting. Dan.
Great, thank you, Marion. Hi, everybody. Good afternoon. Really excited to spend a few minutes this afternoon kicking us off by running us through a little bit here of these public comments that we sent to you earlier today. As you all will remember, the public comments section, the public comments period was open for about 7 days leading up until yesterday. And these were comments that were really on a set of recommendations that were that reflected the state in time prior to our previous meeting. So there are some reflections that we received that I think could potentially have been you may have already raised in that meeting, and hopefully are reflected in the recommendations that are in the edits that we're going to go over in a little bit here. So just a couple of bullet points here. As you can see, we've got a lot of engagement in a relatively short time frame. We've got 48 responses over just 7 days, representing 8 Maine counties. So really a pretty good sort of snapshot of a lot of the state. And just as a quick reminder, I think a lot of folks probably will have seen this, but the framework here, the structure of this was to essentially ask folks to respond to any or all of the 6 different topic areas and sort of give feedback and reactions to the draft recommendations from each of those. So as you can see there, just a quick breakdown. Again, people could and did respond to multiple topics, but the education one got a lot of engagement with 29 folks responding to that, followed by the recommendations around the economy and the recommendations around protecting folks from harms that AI could create or exacerbate. These are still fairly preliminary takeaways. I mean, we only got to see this, yesterday, sort of later in the evening, and you all got to see it earlier this morning. But really wanted to give folks a chance to react to some of what they see here. A couple of top line takeaways that we wrote up here. I think there was a good emphasis on understanding that the work that we are doing, that you all are doing, is not happening in a vacuum, and that there are other sort of similar efforts happening at all different levels, both in the public sector as well as in sort of trade groups and other representative groups here. A lot of folks specifically referenced the NEA AI principles there. And then there was this really, I think, strong through line around the need to involve many voices, and I think really make sure that we get people, give a wide swath of folks the opportunity to weigh in. So I'm gonna just open the floor here for the next few minutes for folks to react. I know, again, fairly quick turnaround here, but would love to hear reactions. Yeah, Sam, go ahead.
Yeah, so to follow up on what you were just saying, Dan, I think just on my review of the comments, the takeaway that you had, that there was a desire for more voices and more opportunity to speak to this issue, that was a clear through line. And I think it was also clear from a lot of the comments that people felt that they didn't have enough time to react to the recommendations of the task force. This is a topic that we've all been engaged with for 10 some odd months, and we've had a lot of time to digest it and to look at the recommendations. But I know multiple people that I encouraged to respond to this felt that they didn't have time to reply sufficiently. I also think that the comments that were included here were very informative. I learned a lot from hearing the responses from educators, a lot of really valid concerns about the way that data would be used from K-12 students, the ways that teachers would be evaluated. These were issues that we've tried to grapple with and done our best, but I think more voices will lead to a better product and lead to more faith in what we produce. So I would really urge us to add to the comment period and to give the task force more time to digest these comments and integrate them into our findings.
Other reactions or anyone want to pick up anything Sam just said or react to other pieces that they may have had a chance to? Yeah, Beth, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, I think obviously a lot around education, as you say, and I think, but aligned to some of the conversation that we had last time when we were together around, I shared, I think it's worth us considering and supported by these comments is that, in education, which is different perhaps than our approach to the economy and business and what we do with AI there, where we have young people involved, that perhaps creating the potential harms built into the education system. And really, I think this emphasis on going slow really came through, and is something, again, I think we talked a bit about in our last meeting together as well, that you saw in here, is that we just don't know enough, and it's not worth it to, in some areas, not certainly, there are other areas where it's not about student privacy, data, and their mental health. But I think it was interesting to hear that coming through, because I think that we were starting to get onto those conversations in our last meeting.
Yeah, thanks, Beth. And we're, after this, I'm going to transition us in a couple of minutes, to a conversation about some of the edits that hopefully reflect the conversation exactly like you're describing. So hopefully we can continue to pick up those exact threads as we move along. So. Any other reflections here?
I'm wondering what we think of the non-responses. Any thoughts on that? Like there's some areas that people didn't do, maybe it's just the sectors that were able to respond quickly, but there's some areas that were really not addressed. And I don't know if that's tacit approval or, we're just not reaching those people. But Nicole had a point, so let's go to that.
Well, I guess I would just underscore what Sam said about the public feedback window feeling a bit short. Um, I do have like a little bit of comfort, I guess, that a lot of these proposals, since they would require funding or law changes, like would go through another public process in the legislature. So I want people to understand this is not the end of the public conversation, but kind of the beginning is how I see it. But I think if there's another opportunity to take public feedback, that way the folks that are tasked with carrying this forward have additional feedback to work from. I think that could be helpful. And the other thing I would say is that I found some places with the economy comments that reflected some concerns that I had that I didn't think to express at our last meeting around sort of, I guess, what would we be doing in terms of state investment with data and other things that could result in companies using that information without any direct benefit back to operations in Maine or Maine's businesses. And I think that came through in some of the comments of like, well, are we sure we want to offer all this stuff up for free, not being sure that we'll get anything back because data is available to anybody in the world. It doesn't mean that because you have a clean data set that someone's going to start a business in Maine just because the data came from Maine, or that that product would thus be available to Maine entities to benefit from. So some of the skepticism I had about those recommendations, I thought came through in some of the public comment.
Mhm.
Mary, just sort of stepping out of co-chair role and stepping into participant role and wondering if there's a path to weave these conversations together. We have something of an obligation under the executive order to deliver a report on a timely basis. We've had various versions of opportunity for people to participate. What I'm wondering aloud here is whether, and I'm thinking of the 10-year economic plan that turns out to just wasn't a one and done kind of thing. There was a revisitation to it that allowed for both additional comments and some learning in real time, and whether there's a vehicle or a discussion to be had about whether this is first report and sort of the starting point as opposed to the ending point for the conversation, in a way in which we bring the report to life with what we have now and open the door for further discussion and commentary that way.
Mhm.
Don't know if that works, but I just thought I'd throw it out there.
I think a great point. I don't know if Dan or Scott want to amplify that or speak to that at any level, but I think that's a great point. Okay. Other comments, questions, thoughts?
Sorry, for some reason I can't find my hand on the toolbar. I don't have this. I guess
I had the same problem.
One very small thing that struck me was that more than one commenter said that we weren't correctly identifying what AI was, or that there was more than one reference to what do you mean by AI, or you aren't defining AI correctly. And it made me wonder, but I didn't have time to go back and look at our most recent draft, whether we do need to say right up front what our definition or definitions of AI are. Sorry, that's a really small thing compared to the sort of big picture things that other people have thought about, but it was something that caught my attention.
I think that's a good point, and I think starting with the definitions is a good practice on some level to make sure that we're all on a level playing field and that we have that carefully defined and as broadly defined that would stand the test of time, maybe as well. Sabrina?
And I can jump in and just point to, I think, as Dan pointed out, the recommendations that went up for public comment is not the full report. So part of what you all will be looking at later in this meeting has some of those definitions that were pointed out there that for this group to react to.
And they are called out as a section. They're not necessarily definitions, but they're called out as a section where it's clear that we're defining them, right?
Yep.
Okay, good. So maybe just in light of that, we just take a quick look at that as we get into it and make sure that they'll provide enough clarity for individuals and again, are timeless enough to last through the period for which this report will be useful.
Mary, stepping back into the sort of this is a beginning, not an end kind of conversation. I wonder how this group would feel about us shaping that in our introductory letter as a way in which we want to begin a conversation, gather additional input, and sort of move this as a theme moving forward. And in all fairness to the conversation, I think that's very consistent with what several of us have suggested along the way, is that this is a very dynamic environment and not something that we can consider one and done, but a starting point for the conversation. And that may be the vehicle by which we, honor both ends of trying to bring this portion of this work to some level of conclusion while opening the door to continuing the conversation.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, David, and also acknowledges that we can't foresee everything that will come. And
That's right.
a little bit of a disclaimer up front that we've done our best to imagine this world as far as we can see it, but it's in that context that the rest of the report kind of reflects our current view.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Just to help out here, Sabrina has her hand up and then Sam again.
Thanks, Dave. Thanks, Mary. Sabrina Jandra on behalf of the Maine Department of Energy Resources. Just wanted to flag in section A under A6 some commentary that internally within the department we've been discussing. Just want to make it very, very clear that we need to have language related to ratepayer protections, as well as protections to reduce costs for small businesses, startups, and public agencies. Also just wanted to flag too that we don't want to either implicitly or interpret endorsing data center development when we're looking at evaluating legacy industrial public sector sites that could support modular data infrastructure. So we're doing things internally within the department relative to exploring, demand forecasting and grid planning, interconnection, cost allocation, and flexibility, of course. And so areas in which we can keep the language tight, but still reflective of where the department priorities are would be appreciated. And of course, happy to put that in writing and also expand where appropriate.
Sam, I think you were next.
Yep. Yeah, I just wanted to follow up on the suggestion from President Dagler about having this be an ongoing process. I mean, I certainly like the opportunity, the idea that folks would have an opportunity to provide ongoing feedback. My question would be, how can we formalize a structure for that so it's not just people shouting into the void? I mean, I think with the task force report that we're putting together, this is a point in time document that is going to advise people on policy decisions and agency policies. And I think it's, if that's what people are referring to, then it's important that feedback is incorporated into that document. Otherwise, I think people will have the sense that they're not really having an impact. So I just like to really be very clear and concrete about what that would actually look like if we were going to give people an opportunity to provide feedback after the report is complete, so that they really feel like they're being heard.
Hmm. I don't know if there's any, maybe Scott or Dan have a way to help us to imagine the mechanism of that, or if that's something that we should talk about as we bring this to a close. Okay, maybe we'll move on to Ruth and hear from Ruth.
Thank you. Just a quick observation. In looking over the comments, a lot of the ones related to education, I was happy to see that many responses for education. We put it out in our networks to try to get as much educator feedback as we could. But specifically, I was surprised to see that so many felt that the recommendations essentially created like an open season for AI products to be tested with Maine students, when that actually was exactly the opposite of the intention of how we crafted the recommendations. So I don't know if it was just their bias that was like a knee-jerk reaction to the recommendations, or if there's actually something in the way that we worded that recommendation about experimenting that is not what we intended. So I don't know if somebody can look that over. I'm happy to take a look at it, just to look at that particular paragraph to see if there's a way that we may have inadvertently done exactly what the opposite of what we intended to do.
Hmm. So, yeah, I'm reflecting to that a little bit. Maybe we take that up when we review those again for the last time and make sure that they're positioned the right way. It's obvious to me whose networks were super active in getting comments, and I think that's really important in this too, that you guys were very proactive about getting the word out around public comments, where maybe some of the groups were a little slow in that. Okay, Molly, you had a point?
Yeah, thanks. I just wanted to underscore, I think in reviewing the public comments, I saw a lot of concern related to data privacy as a really critical bulwark against some of the more egregious harms. And so I think especially that was coming up for education, but also a number of other areas. And so just wanted to raise that particularly. It's something we obviously cover, but thinking about the unique nature of the harms for some of these areas and whether that needs to be underscored, and whether that could also help people appreciate the broader framework that we've created.
Mm-hmm. So again, might be something that we make sure has the right exclamation point as we go through the recommendations. Yeah. Okay. Other comments? We're a little bit shy of our target time, but I think it's okay to proceed if we think that's okay. Dan, do you want to carry on?
Yeah, I see Chris. Yeah.
Chris, yeah. At the risk of us moving on, Chris has raised his hand, so let's hear from him.
I withdraw my hand. Let's move on.
No, I'm not. I'm just
I'm
giving
teasing.
time. Chris, go ahead.
I think you all probably saw it too, but in the comments that I was able to review this morning, there were several that suggested more specificity would be needed. So my recommendation is, as we take the next turn, is we maybe illustrate the report, if we can, with some examples and some vignettes to provide such specificity to help people imagine what we might be referencing.
Yeah, it's a great point that the public comments are, don't have the benefit of the full. That's a really good point, worth waiting for. And Sarah.
Thanks. So I just wanted to respond to the idea of how to continue to engage the public as we move forward with this report, recognizing that the task force has sort of a deliverable date, but that, as many folks have said, the work is just beginning. And there is a recommendation where we probably could add some language. It's recommendation 1 under the public sector that talks about sort of how we'll move this work forward. And I think we could talk about the responsibility to continue to engage the public in that section, if that's helpful.
Great suggestion. And let's make sure that gets galvanized as we get to that part. Yeah, that's great.
So
great point. Go ahead, Dan.
Yeah, I was just going to say, maybe we should, given that we're moving into some conversation about the specific recs, maybe I'll take us into talking about some edits to recommendations here, just try to keep the train rolling a little bit. In much the same way that we kicked off our last meeting on the 26th with sort of a running down a list of recommendations that or edits, I should say, to recommendations that you all provided. Just wanted to do the same for, in particular, the two that we spoke about when we had our hybrid meeting a week and a half or so ago, which were firstly the recommendations around the economy. And Senator Grohowski already sort of mentioned a couple of potential tweaks here, so definitely noting those as well. But just wanting to make sure that you all will have seen this sort of redlined language in the prep memo. This will start on page 3 of the prep memo. There was a couple of notes about clarifying language around established businesses making use of AI. I think we had a strong recommendation around startups, and a couple of folks referenced some other sort of businesses getting involved in that as well. So made a couple of changes around that. Thinking about the idea of using AI to quickly identify new business opportunities, new markets, et cetera, did a little bit of that. And then actually speaking to Sabrina, what you mentioned earlier around evaluating for data centers, and maybe this language still needs to be tweaked a little bit based on your feedback, but trying to include some language specific to developing a strategic roadmap and plan around how to respond to those kinds of inquiries. So just as we did last time, I'm going to quickly pause for a few minutes here and let folks react specifically to the economy pieces. Again, beginning on page 3 in that prep memo. It's also in the larger memo that we sent yesterday as well, the larger draft. So any reactions there? Yeah, Senator Grohowski.
Just to kind of piggyback on what I had said earlier, the area that was just sort of concerning for me was that number 2 second paragraph, where it's saying the state should foster the production of open source AI ready training data. And then what, right? Like, how does that actually result in an economic benefit for us was the question that I had that was reflected in the public comments. And the only other thing I think I would say right now is that I agree with the Department of Energy Resources comment that the language felt like the new language felt very like positive around data centers, and I just think that that's like it needs some there's some issues for ratepayers that we would need to consider. So I think what you said, Sabrina, was helpful, and I would agree with the way that you framed it and like to see some further clarification there.
Great. I think in the interest of time, I may keep us moving. Just a lot of other pieces to hit here today, so just want to make sure we're moving at a decent clip. And the other piece, I think, the other piece that we went over on the 26th was the recommendations out of the harms relating to AI group. And this one had a great conversation in the room and online last time, and a decent amount of sort of overworking and editing. And you can see what we did sort of listed up here, beginning on page 10 of that prep memo, and again reflected in the fuller draft there. So added a couple of extra areas for potential ongoing study and monitoring, including referencing sort of intellectual property and the creative industries, as well as this bullet on harm specific to children. And I wonder interested about folks' reaction about that as it pertains to some of the feedback in the public comments on education. We had a great conversation about this quote unquote statement of intent and some of the clarity around what that actually could look like, and hopefully tried to broaden the language a little bit to make it less about sort of the specific legislative statement of intent and more about providing further clarity to courts and to others. So hopefully that gets a little closer to what people were thinking. And then had some language around how this isn't what really changed the top line title for the second recommendation to reaffirm that this is an ongoing work and this isn't let's do a study and then forget about it. And then finally had this thing around plain language for disclosure and a little bit more clarity on the outreach and the folks for whom an AI literacy campaign might be best served in terms of doing sort of targeted outreach. Again, that starts on page 10. And again, I'll pause here before we move on. Oh, Mary, I think you may be muted, Mary.
I think people are satisfied with the result.
All right. We'll take it. Lastly, just a quick note here. We spent some time making some sort of smaller changes here to the ones that we had referenced previously. So you'll see those appearing in red line in the prep memo as well. Some things about being very clear about what we meant about geographic reach of state programs for workforce, swapping around a little bit of sort of what examples fit which recommendations around healthcare and making sure that healthcare workers are included. And then in the public sector, I think responding to some of the feedback we got from our legislative members, making sure that this doesn't just have a sort of myopic focus on the executive branch, but is broader there as well. So with all of that out in the world, the other major change is the sort of overarching implementation section, which you all will have seen an earlier iteration of that was framed slightly more specifically as a cross-cutting recommendation section. In the 926 meeting, we had a great conversation to sort of close the last hour or so around starting to think about what implementation might look like. And what we have done is tried to marry those two pieces into sort of a singular area by pulling out these 5 themes that you can see listed here and that are sort of these cross-cutting actions and themes, and sort of somewhat filing some of the areas of priority that you all identified underneath them. So it's a decent amount of extra text towards the end of that full draft, but curious to hear how folks think about this sort of structural change and whether it reflects the nature of the conversation as you heard it over the last week and a half or so.
Thoughts or questions? I would say all of this non-response is normal as we get closer and closer to the bullseye. So I'm not concerned that people are talking, but I just want to make sure that everyone is heard. But Chris is going to help us out with a comment, and then Sam has something.
Is there an opportunity in 4 and 5 here to connect it to a particular charge of a state agency like GoPIF, or thinking about a way to also deal with the earlier conversation about how people can continue to be involved? If we could, I don't know if this might be artificially sort of focusing it, and we don't want to do that, but 4 and 5 here seem to be powerful implementation opportunities, and if we could put in a little more structure or sort of an accountable owner or owners around it, that might also help direct members of the public who have conviction around this topic to that same type of agency. GoPIF comes to mind because you're about the future, but that might not be the best place.
I wanted to touch on point one of those recommendations, and I apologize, I wasn't able to make it for the last conversation, so I don't know what all was discussed, but just in terms of the framing of that point one, educate Mainers about AI, its potential benefits, and how to stay safe. That strikes me as a very top-down framing of how to think about this issue. It's very much the state's job to educate the people of the state as opposed to workers, as opposed to the broad cross-section of people who are actually on the front lines of implementation to educate state policymakers about how to handle this issue more effectively. So I would really like to see that point changed to reflect a voice that incorporates feedback from Mainers on a regular basis to really show that this is a two-way street, not just top-down, but really an ongoing process of soliciting feedback from the people that are using this technology.
Good point. Other thoughts on these points? Molly?
Thanks. I really like the way you put that, Sam. I think that's an excellent suggestion. I also, in looking at number two, just exploring the opportunity to develop more specificity about how the harms that people might experience will be addressed on an ongoing basis and what kind of protections can be put in place and how they can be bolstered over time. We know that the legislature continues to work on a lot of different initiatives that relate to this, but trying to provide as many suggestions about really specific ways that people can be on top of both sharing the harm that they're experiencing or that they're aware of, and also engaged in some kind of redress on the part of the state. I like, Chris, your idea of tying this to a particular state agency that people could maybe contact, or that there could be some back and forth discussion and continued communication around, because I think it would go a long way to addressing that question.
Great points. Other thoughts or considerations? Carry on from those or new ones? Chris?
Just going back to what Dave was suggesting earlier about the opening frame, the technology is just it's already, exponentially evolved since we started our work together. It's going to continue to be the case. Maybe one of our recommendations is to task a particular body within the government to stay abreast of that evolution and change, if it's GoPIF or a different group. So it might be, if that idea resonates for the reasons that we were all just discussing, then it might also be another way to organize the opening remarks to capture that reality of, this is just a moment in time. This is just the beginning. The state is going to stay focused on this. And in fact, Commissioner so-and-so of such and such an agency is now charged to ensure that we stay on the cutting edge of where this is going, to protect our citizens and embrace innovation and opportunity and such and like.
Oh, Dan?
Just in line with what others have already said, and I'm struggling to find the place to suggest this observation get inserted, but three things that I think need to be woven into our implementation recommendations is, again, echoing that this is a start, not an end to a process, that it is two-way street between the government, the state government, and its citizens in terms of, and that we're seeking to create the capacity to innovate while minimizing negative impacts to those affected. And particularly around, I'm not the least bit surprised that the vast majority of comments had to do with education in the earliest years of education, that there is a deep concern about making innovative use of technologies with young children. And so addressing that, our commitment is building the capacity to make appropriate uses of technology in ways that are, proven before they're scaled, is something that I think we should leave in there at some point, in some place.
There's some eloquent elements there too that I think could be incorporated into the letter too, and really set the stage. So I appreciate those comments. Anyone else with anything related to this slide? Okay, Dan. All right. We now will switch over to the discussion of the letter. Thank you everyone for all of your insights. As we begin to turn this into a more formal report, as we talked about, it's crucial to bring some of these big picture unifying themes together. And we will use an introductory letter from the co-chairs to start to introduce these big kinds of these big ideas. Up on the screen, you will see, right, so this is the objectives, but then let's see, up on the screen, there we go. Whoop. Okay. Up on the screen, you'll see a short description of what these kinds of letters are meant to accomplish. This is a little bit of an eye exam for everybody, but they can help to draw attention to important findings right at the beginning of the report. They're great places to list any of our cross-cutting ideas that don't fit neatly into other parts of the report, or these eloquent themes that we've kind of discovered in this conversation that would really bring things home and keep people reading. It'll be the first thing the readers see when they open up a report, so it can be really valuable to lay out some important level setting information, and that hopefully keeps people engaged. This example is from the State Infrastructure Rebuilding and Resilience Commission, and it might be useful as a starting point. It was also linked in your prep memo, so you have a version of it that you can actually look at if you like. And so that really brings us to the question, can we really enumerate the themes that should be pulled out? We've listed a few up on the screen that were top of mind for Dave and I, and we've talked about a few in this discussion, but we wanted to spend the next 20 minutes or so sort of brainstorming whether we have the right set of ideas or if there are other pieces that make sense to include. So with that, I will, as you're reading through the slide, I'll open up the discussion. So Dan will, of course, add the things that we talked about in, just a few minutes ago. But is there anything else that really speaks to you as needing to sort of come up front and really be addressed in a sort of more personal way as a message from the co-chairs? Beth?
At the risk, and I apologize of sounding like a broken record, but I do think when in reading these bullets, and I'm sure it would be much more eloquently written, but I really think it doesn't address the complexity of something that can show a lot of possibility without but also balance the complexity of the skepticism that really needs to be in here. And I think, when I look at the comments, one person sort of captures my thoughts really well, and they say, like, there's no one bringing a more skeptical view to AI tools on the task force, and that has been sort of what's been reviewed by the public. And I think it brings merit to mention in the letter the complexities of that, and that harms can't be weighed the same. It's not all,
Right.
one size fits all to all users and to in all areas. And we've tried to, by breaking them down into these different sectors, we've tried to address that a bit, but I think it bears bringing it right out into the introduction to name that it is something we certainly did in education, spent considerable time talking about. We've talked about it in the larger group as well, and to make sure that it really is reflected in our in the report what we pass out of here.
I think it's so important, and it also is, we need to give the sense that we have some early signs as to how AI potentially could be harmful, but this is such a dynamic set of tools that we need to stay vigilant and keep recognizing those things as we move forward. I mean, I think everything about AI says that it's going to change. It's going to continue to evolve and change as we move forward, and we have to, I think, own that up front. I think it's also true that it's not possible to set enough boundaries around AI to put it in a box, limit it, and put it on a shelf. It's going to be part of everybody's everyday lives, and we are going to have to get comfortable with both the benefits and the harms of it as quickly as possible and get up to speed. Ruth? No. Oh, wait, I think you're.
Oh,
we
sorry,
can't hear
talking to
you.
myself on mute. I was just saying that I definitely agreed with what Beth had said, and just to kind of put a little bit of a finer point on it, I think we did a really good job of showing the possibilities and highlighting the opportunities for AI. But in doing so, I think we may, other than the harm section, like we specifically had the harm section for that reason. But I think because we pulled it out, when people are reading over the report, they're having a difficult time seeing that we were weighing both sides and we weren't just positive about AI. So if we could really, as Beth was saying, bring that up as well in the introduction, I think that will help people understand where we came from. The second thing I wanted to offer is that in the example that you all are sharing, I really like how right up front they kind of they bring it home. They personalize that the report was pulled together by talking to Mainers, that they got feedback from people. And we did a lot of that. Like, I'm really proud of the work that this task force did to bring so many different perspectives to the table to inform the report. So if there was a way that the letter could specifically outline who we brought to the table, maybe pull a few quotes that people shared to really personalize it and make it seem more human, I think that would benefit the rest of the report. So those are just the two things I wanted to highlight.
Great comments. Dan?
Thank you. Making notes because I keep hearing more actionable good thoughts from people like Ruth while I'm trying to organize my own thoughts. Yeah, I mean, I think the letter needs to emphasize that we're proposing a balanced approach to take advantage of powerful technology for good, and putting in place the thoughtful guardrails that are necessary to minimize harm, and specifically that we're about creating capacity for building the skills of Maine's workforce for an economy in which AI is going to be a dominant technology, accelerating economic growth in Maine to take advantage of blah, 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 delivering healthcare more efficiently across our very distributed rural state, using tools that are now at our disposal, making the government of Maine more accountable to Maine citizens through the use of these tools, and then balancing that with making sure that we are expressing that we have heard from folks who have genuine concerns for good reason about ensuring that protections of our privacy, protections of our mental health, particularly our children's mental health, are factored into the decisions we make about deployment of tools when it's government, including schools, that are doing the deployment, and that we're creating capacity for making sound judgments about deployment by being proactive in the way that this task force was set up to be proactive.
Great. Any reflections from that or thoughts on other things? Justin.
Yeah, I think that to piggyback off of the last few comments, I think that properly giving people a sense of the scope of the not just the harms, but the potential positive aspects to integration of AI into Maine that we considered is maybe something we should try to do up front in that letter. I just like it's hard to understand like reading through the comments, there's so much fear and anger and like kind of like confusion around where this technology is bringing us societally. And I don't know how to do this. Maybe those who are more politically savvy on this call know better than I do, but like we can't address that. Like there's a lot of things we can't solve. And I don't know how to say that without it feeling like a huge concession, but like there's aspects to this issue that feel beyond the scope of this task force. I don't know how to properly scope expectations and I'm hoping other folks do, because that feels like a pretty big challenge with this letter.
I think that's a great point, and I think we have to concede that, that there needs to be both support and vigilance at lots of different levels, that it's not entirely the government or entirely individuals or entirely the private sector, but really a combination of those approaches that are going to lead to responsible implementation and which is why the task force was constructed in the way that it was. So maybe we bring that to light. Other thoughts on that? That's me just off the top of my head, but happy to hear other reflections to Justin's comment. Okay, Nicole?
This might be somewhat related and it might not be in the right context of the introductory letter, but one of the things that came through to me in the public comments was folks were saying, these are these statements, where's the evidence that this is the right approach? And at least on the harms group, we read a lot of articles. There was a lot of like material that we looked at between the meetings that isn't, as far as I can tell, publicly available via the task force website. And because nothing is cited in the recommendation section, it's really not clear maybe how we came to some of the conclusions that we did. And it's not true that every conclusion had some kind of great research behind it, but some of them I think did. And I don't think we're giving enough credit to that part of the process. And maybe that could be talked about in the chair's letter or somewhere else in the introduction. But I think there ought to be a repository where all of that super helpful stuff that the GoPIF staff compiled is available for anyone to look at, recognizing that they were the inputs, part of the inputs toward our decision-making around the recommendations.
I love that. I think that's such a great point. And I think it is, many of these things remain to be fully tested, right? Which is the other acknowledgement is that, there is not yet enough data to know that one path is better than another or one approach is better than another. So I think that's great. Dan?
I just wanted to offer that this report represents just the first step in an ongoing effort to enable the people of Maine to benefit from these powerful technologies. and guide sound decision-making in implementing regulatory and administrative approaches to protect the people of Maine as this technology comes to dominate the economy and our lives. And sort of building on Justin's point about what we were hearing in the feedback, some of the feedback we got was sort of calling for us to stuff the genie back in the bottle, and that's not actually an option.
Yeah.
So, acknowledging that, and that we are therefore doing the best we can to craft a positive future with this as the weather that we are going to be living in. That's the piece that's not a choice. How we respond to it is.
Yeah. Well said. Other thoughts? Okay, if there are no other thoughts, and I'm watching for Chris's hand, but it didn't go up. Okay. There are no other thoughts. Maybe we break just a couple of minutes early. We are due for a break and to be back here by 3:05. So, sorry, is that Dan? Am I jumping the gun, or were there more things you wanted to show? Dan Matz.
No, totally. That was my mistake. Yep, 3:05 is correct, and I'll change the slide to reflect that.
Okay, great. So why don't we break? You're welcome to go off screen, and we will be back at 3:05, and I will turn it over to President Dagler, who will take us through the rest of the meeting. Thank you.
Thank you, Mary. Okay, folks, are we ready to rejoin the conversation? Dan and Scott, I always want to make sure that you're ready for us because you're
Ready to
central to
go.
our conversation. What's that?
Ready to go.
Ready to go? Okay. Well, hang on here and let me get my tech a little bit fixed. First of all, we are going to jump back into this. For the remaining time together, we're going to run through some introductory text that will be fairly new to you. Think of this as the scaffolding that helps provide the structure and the context to the recommendations. Given our earlier conversation, we may be able to fold some of that conversation into these parts. There are 3 portions to this introductory text, and we'll spend a few minutes on each of those. The first is the report introduction itself. This is really intended to square away some fundamental questions. Things like, what is it about AI that merits a state policy task force? This section summarizes some of our earliest conversations when this group was just starting to get our arms around some of these topics. It also provides a definition of AI, and it situates the task force work in the context of both the broader AI moment, as well as state and federal policies as they're evolving. So let me pause here for a minute and get your reactions. Did we cover what we need to in this initial section? Are there findings that you feel we should make sure that are included that might fit well into one of these 4 buckets? And those 4 buckets, I think, are up on your screen, so that can help you sort of understand where we are. Any comment? Any thoughts? You're probably reading some right now because this is pretty hot off the presses. So I'll give you a minute just to sort of contemplate it.
President Daigle, can I ask a question?
Absolutely.
Hi, folks. Andrew Butcher with Maine Connectivity Authority. Sorry, I'm joining a little late today due to existing conflicts. Just on section 4 here, as a newer section with the introduction, I appreciate the addition of it from a contextual standpoint. I'm wondering if folks could just voice over what prompted and what sort of key context we're looking to make sure is emphasized within the sort of federal policy context portion.
Good question. Dan, do you want to sort of layer in contextually what's important there?
Absolutely, yeah. So I think the theory here in including a sort of overview of the federal policy context in which this work is happening is to sort of continue to feed into this top line question of why focus on AI, and to feed into the question of why would a state government, why would the state of Maine, why should we be treating AI sort of as a policy issue worth spending all of the hard work and labor that you all have spent over the last 10 months or so on this. And part of that story is thinking about the sort of shifting federal policy that in which a lot of this work is situated. Given as folks have brought up throughout this process, but also on a number of times today, given the speed at which these technologies are moving and the lack of sort of clear federal guidelines on a lot of the types of issues that we're talking about here, we felt as though it was important to include a sort of surface level overview of what actions have taken place at the federal level. Again, to reaffirm the fact that largely a lot of these decisions are being left to states and as the sort of laboratories of democracy. And you know, there's an argument to be made that if there were a stronger federal policy context on a lot of these things, maybe some of this work would be sort of less vital, but given the dynamic situation in which we find ourselves over the last couple of years on AI policy, that just is another sort of bullet point in favor of sort of the importance of this work. President Daigle, does that match with, and Mary and others, does that match with your understanding of the importance there?
So I'll let Mary speak for herself. For me, I think it's a good summarization. And Mary, I think if you've got a comment or you've got a different thought, please let us know.
I think that's very much the policy forward response. But I would say beyond that, AI is somewhat unique, or at least a high priority item that is dynamic and powerful in the economic sector. And whether you want it to be as pervasive as it is or not, it certainly now represents so much money in the global economy that it just can't, I think it can't be ignored. And I think for Maine to not be part of that, it would be a shame. Like it is a potential economic driver for the state, and it's something that we should think about.
Andrew?
That's really helpful. Thanks. And I'm happy to elaborate if useful as to sort of what's prompting my particular attention on this language, if useful. But given that, and given the framing of the language and the reference to the White House's AI action plan, and contrast to the recommendations from the National Governors Association, I think maybe just useful to explicitly identify that this task force and the governor's charge in essence is very much in line with that balance reflected in the AI action plan. And it's sort of implied in the, I guess, third paragraph within that section. But I might just emphasize that this task force is not responsible for implementation of laws. So there's not laws that are getting passed out of this task force recommendations. This task force is doing the thing which the action plan indicated was necessary, which is evaluate the landscape and implications of expanded AI application and use in the context of state needs and priorities to inform state policy development and alignment with federal policy. So I think that is a really useful way, if it makes sense and folks are in agreement, of emphasizing the very pragmatic function of the diligence done by this task force.
Andrew, can I just ask a follow-up question? And I think is contextually similar. You've indicated that it's not the task force role to really create legislation. And I might argue that as we make recommendations, sort of keeping them in that action plan framework, because I think we enter into a sort of treacherous territory if we begin to presume that we're going to tell the next governor how to govern. And that presents similar problems to telling the legislature how to legislate. Would you suggest that those those understandings need to be building blocks of the introductory context?
I think I agree. In the essence of effectively, look, I think what I'm hearing you say is there's comprehensive assessment and identification of resources that inform recommendations and priorities within this task force recommendations. That is, they are just that, recommendations based upon the assessment, investigation, and coordination among a diverse body of stakeholders. Am I reflecting your point?
I think you did it better than I did. Yeah. Other thoughts? So we'll take silence as, I guess, agreeing with Andrew's proposition that we need to take special care in terms of how we position the recommendations.
I think Chris has a question.
Yeah,
Chris.
Andrew, I thought maybe, not to put you on the spot, but are you stopping just short of saying something more about the positioning around the federal policy language as it is? It seems like there might be an unease there. And I thought it brought this discussion and exchange just brought for me the question of why anchor to one level of government or the other. I really like the way Mary sort of framed it around it's more of a transformational moment and opportunity for society, for business, for government as well. So I guess my note on this would be, is it essential that we anchor to some sort of difference between state and federal context, or can we elevate the whole thing somehow? And I thought that's where you were going, Andrew, but don't let me put words in your mouth.
I like those words. No, I mean, I think the outcome there, Chris, is well aligned, and I think that is the function that this task force has attended to. Really looking at both the challenges and opportunities and how that informs our policy and practice. And I think that emphasis is important. And I think that I don't think it is I think both to the constraints that I think that President Degler identified of, look, we're also not suggesting that future governor, future legislature that presuppose priorities in that context. I think also recognizing that we have an emerging balance between state and federal regulation regarding the use and application of these technologies. And I think want to emphasize that this is doing the thing of trying to navigate that to inform both state and federal policy, especially through the lens of our state policy needs and priorities.
Okay.
Dave, I don't know if you can see Dan Sayre's hand up.
Oh, yes. Representative Sayre.
Yeah, thank you. If I could chime in as a legislator, and I think building on those comments, short answer, yes. Longer answer, I think this report is about identifying desired outcomes and potentially identifying pathways to those outcomes where those are clear, and not prescribing them where they're less clear, so that federal government, state government, local government, private sector can take action as they see fit. But I will also disclose, because I believe it's now public, there will be a legislature convening in January. There are bill proposals in consideration designed to take up some of the recommendations from this report in that time frame, if we see that some of these recommendations are clear enough that it's prudent to take action in the session that begins in a couple of months.
Exciting to hear.
Yes, exactly. Exactly. All right. We're nearing in on the time. I don't want to stifle comments if there are any. I think I feel like we've got agreement, and it's a question of sort of how we frame those pieces. The next piece here describes the mechanics. It's the makeup, the meeting structure, the subgroups. So the mechanics of how we came together to build this report. So once again, I'll just give a quick pause. I don't think we need as much time here, so maybe 5 minutes to discuss whether we've covered this, there are any missing pieces, and anything else that needs to be added. Okay. I think it's pretty straightforward, but does anybody have any comments that they feel they need to add for this section?
Just a question. Will this portion of the report articulate how the task force was selected? Because there are a number of questions in the public comments about the composition of the task force and how those decisions were made. It could be useful to explain that process.
I think we can explain how the task force came together. Scott or Dan, I might turn that over to you. Describing the process for selection is a little bit of a, I mean, you could you could just recite the executive order, but Dan or Scott, I don't know how you want to approach that.
We could take a run at what something like that might look like and see if it fits in. I'm happy to add some language around that, and sort of see what shakes out that way. Yeah, it's a good suggestion. Thanks, Sam.
Yep.
Okay. Okay. Let's move ourselves forward then. The final piece here is, as you flip through these pages, you notice that each of the sub 6 groups has sort of its own mini introduction in the front of the recommendations. It's just an introductory paragraph or two of text. You've all seen various versions of the recommendations at this point, but these beginning sections are meant to tee up the recommendations by relaying some of the findings from each of the subgroups. So we'll spend the rest of our time this afternoon with these subtopic introduction sections. And mostly here we're trying to focus in on, does what you see reflect your group's findings? Are we missing anything? Is there anything we should be considering to add in? Anything like that? And we'll open that up for discussion. And then I think we can sort of move to what our next steps are. Looks like people are still reading a bit, but any thoughts that with regard to our ability to cover the bases here? And again, the chance is maybe not, because we're not really trying to add new information here. We're just trying to contextualize it and frame up the recommendations.
Looks like Representative Sayre might have his hand up there.
Thank you.
Dan.
Thank you. On topic D, healthcare, I have a concern that suggesting that AI offers significant promise for improving the health of Maine people may be an exaggeration. That AI offers significant promise for improving the delivery of health care to Maine people, I think is a fairer statement. But it's going to enhance people's, I think it's going to enhance delivery, not health directly.
So I think that's a distinction with a meaningful difference. And I personally would accept that. Are there any other thoughts on that?
I apologize. I don't have the text in front of me. I'm driving, but I think that's a fair statement. I think the important aspect here is what time frame are we talking about? For sure, maybe in the near term, it's not necessarily going to improve the health and just the delivery aspect. Longer term, I think it likely will, but perhaps that's not the frame that we're intended to focus on here.
Okay. I appreciate you chiming in, Dan. That's helpful.
See Justin also may raise his hand there too.
Hey, Justin.
Yeah, thanks. Just going with the theme of public trust and transparency and accountability raised by some of the comments, maybe building something into the intro to topic E, just a sentence or two, assuring people that that is something we considered and something along the lines of Mainers should have clear information when and where and how AI is being used, and confident in the oversight imposed on AI. Something along those lines. I feel like, not to be too responsive to the comments, but it does feel like our section in particular maybe could have been a little bit more gloomy, a little bit more less like optimistic and cheery about how we could respond to the AI related harms, and maybe spend a little bit more ink on what those harms actually are. So I think just indicating that in a line or two in the intro could go a long way.
Okay, thank you. Helpful, Justin. Representative Sarragan.
Thank you. This may be a troublesome suggestion, but I'll make it anyway. It might be use putting our sense of caution around AI in the context of the harmful impacts of social media that we're currently living with, at least acknowledging with some humility that we are aware that the rollout of social media was perhaps without significant safeguards. And we are in a position of now having to react, that being more thoughtful in the rollout, we seek to be more thoughtful in the adoption of AI and the creation of safeguards because of that recent experience.
So Molly, I see your hand, but I want to give time and space for folks to react to Representative Sarah's comment. Yeah, minimum. Would people agree with that? Which is, I don't happen to disagree, but includes the conjecture that the failure to have safeguards has created a potential harm with the use of social media. I personally agree, but I don't know that that's necessarily considered a universal truth, or that there are strategies that might have changed the current outcomes.
I put this in the comments. I think it's an excellent parallel. It's one that's been on my mind as, you know, somebody who was getting on Facebook when I first entered college. It seemed like a great thing with a ton of potential to connect with friends. And I don't think any of us could have foreseen the social influence it would have, the political impacts it would have on elections, on division in the country. So I think using that as a historical reference point and showing that we're responding to this new shift with caution is something that will help to alleviate some of those concerns, or at least will show that we're taking them seriously.
Justin, you agree?
Yeah, I don't have anything to contribute, but I was nodding vigorously. I appreciate that, Sam.
Okay. Others? Let me move to Molly then. You had your hand up earlier.
Thanks. Yeah, just building off of what Justin said, I think in the second paragraph to the introduction, the statement Maine policymakers will not be able to anticipate or counter every harmful use, etc. I wondered if we were missing the word alone somewhere there. Certainly they won't be able to address every single one, but that we are attempting to create a framework that will help them be a part of a broader coalitional approach. And I think that the next part of the next clause of that sentence is really is nice and captures that sense of the importance of everyone being empowered to be a part of building more awareness and more safety. But it just the way that it's written almost felt like we were saying that the horse is already out of the barn, where there won't be anything that the legislators can do, which I don't think is what we're trying to convey.
Right. Okay. I appreciate that, Molly. Other thoughts? So you are all at risk of being invited to a faculty association meeting, because when I ask for thoughts at a faculty association meeting, there's no quiet space in the room during that period. So, okay. Are we ready to move on? Going once? Going twice? Okay, we'll move into wrapping up, and we may be able to give you a little bit of time back that I'm sure we'll use at a future meeting. First of all, I do want to thank everyone for a great conversation. I think the silence suggested that there were places of great agreement, but when we had conversation, it was robust and thoughtful, and I appreciate that. Your work, together with the awesome work of the staff who are supporting us, have set us up extremely well to meet our delivery date for this report, notwithstanding the thoughts around additional public comment time. And the staff and Mary and I will take that into consideration as we're leaning into the finalization of this report. That said, our next meeting is Friday, October 24th from 12 to 2 p.m. We're working with staff to come up with a game plan for that day, and that'll let us reflect on the tremendous work that we've done, and I think really be able to see a near final draft of how everything has come together. And by near final, I think the goal at this point is somewhere between 99 and 99.9% complete, but wanting to make sure that folks have had the opportunity to check off and say, we have either honored the thoughts that that have surfaced here, or we have identified a vehicle for making sure that that does happen. So, Dan or Scott, I'll ask you if there are any things on the administrative side that we need to address. And so go there, and then I just want to make sure that Mary has an opportunity to see if there are any closing comments from her. Dan and Scott?
I think all good from our end. As President Degler said, keep an eye out for us. We're going to try to be quick and to the point here as we hurtle down the road here to the end of the month. So thank you very much.
All right, thank you. Mary, anything on your side?
just to extend my gratitude for everybody's time and very eloquent comments and definitive silence, showing again that we're closer and closer to the bullseye. So really appreciate that and appreciate the incredibly hard work of the GoPIF staff who've just been incredible through this. So thank you.
Okay. Everybody's good? Thank you again, and enjoy the couple of minutes that we've given to you to catch up on other things. Thank you.